Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, December 17th, 2019. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, UCLA professor Ramesh Srinivasan. His book, Beyond the Valley, How Innovators Around the World Are Overcoming Inequality and Creating the Tech of Tomorrow. Also on the program today, impeachment marches across the country. Literally, there are impeachment marches across the country today. Hopefully you're listening to this while you're at one. And frontline centrist Dems begin to line up behind said impeachment. Meanwhile, Purple State Republican senators start to freak out about a trial in the Senate. As Mitch McConnell says, we won't call any witnesses because that's the only fair thing to do. Donald Trump's Saudi arms deal, this is the emergency one with no congressional approval, allows the Saudis to host production of smart bombs. What could go wrong? Judge allows Georgia to purge more than 300,000 voters overnight. It's added to the over 200,000 in Wisconsin the other day. And the DCCC, fresh off their massive failure in supporting a guy who turned into a Republican, blacklists firms working with any Democratic primary challengers, but okays working with the Republicans. The Mormon Church accused of hoarding cash ostensibly collected for charity. Speaking of charity, the Sackler family has been sucking Purdue Pharma of billions leading up to its bankruptcy. And 90 of the Fortune 500 paid no federal income tax in 2018. Starting to see a theme here, folks. Trump Treasury regulators may twist the Community Reinvestment Act so it can be used for millionaire and billionaire sports teams owners to build stadiums as long as it's in areas of poverty. All this and more on today's Majority Report.
It's how you fight it.
Through the looking glass, we're going to take your property, kick you out, give the money to millionaires and billionaires, and you're welcome.
And then you could be collecting rags for yourself. And then you look out and you go, that stadium, we built that.
Yeah. I mean, you'll look out from a distance. Just a little bit of house cleaning. We've gotten a lot of emails asking, will the AM Quickie happen over your Christmas break? And the answer is more than likely. We are working on figuring that out. I desperately want to be able to sleep in, but at the same time, maybe I can just go back to sleep and take a nap after that. But subscribe by going to amquickie.com. 5 minutes every morning. More or less a little bit extended headlines, and of course, from a left perspective, But a quick way to catch up on what the day's news is, particularly when we're gone. Yesterday, was it yesterday? We had talked about a New York Times article that had come out about Cenk Uygur and about Bernie Sanders retracting his endorsement. We discussed in the fun half some of the things that we found problematic with the things that Cenk has said in the past. The vast, he's apologized for those things. And we had different discussions about that. But the gist of what we were talking about in terms of the New York Times, which is, I think, indicative of a major problem at the Times, was that they had presumably, I don't know, there was a Twitter account that has really gone ballistic. I mean, in a way that I've very rarely seen such vigorous research done by an amateur Twitterer. It's almost impressive in terms of the relentlessness and also the disingenuousness. They cut a clip of Cenk Uygur with David Duke, where David Duke was saying, "I'm not racist," and Cenk said, "Right, you're not racist." And the New York Times reported that as Cenk Uygur agrees that David Duke is not racist. When in fact, with any context, and maybe just even watching that video without it being in context, it's quite clear that Uygur is being what is known as sarcastic. Sarcasm is this very, very nuanced new form of communication that the New York Times may not be aware of. Anyways, they were informed that there is this new methodology of registering disdain called sarcasm or facetiousness. And they added a correction to the piece that, of course, nobody goes back and reads, right? I mean, back in the day, if you issued a correction, the way that people read newspapers was like, I read Monday's paper and then I read Tuesday's. And on Tuesday, I see, oh, there's a correction. But what they do is they just attach it to Monday's paper. As if people go back and, you know what, I read that thing about Uygur yesterday. I think I'm going to read it again just to see if there's a correction.
Yeah, I bookmark my articles just so I can go back.
And this is the correction. An earlier version of this article referred imprecisely to a remark by Cenk Uygur, a radio host who is running for a California congressional seat. When David Duke, the white supremacist, appeared on his show and denied being a racist, Mr. Uygur was replying sarcastically when he said, "No, of course not." Now, I want to be clear on this. Imprecisely is doing a lot of work there and is a very, very loose term. I mean, it's sort of ironic that imprecisely could be used in such an imprecise way. Because to report this as Cenk Uygur was agreeing with David Duke that he's not a racist, when in fact it turns out that Uygur was sarcastic, in other words, ironic, in other words, saying, no, of course not, as in, of course you are. It is literally precisely 180 degrees from what the reality of that exchange was. And then, of course, like I say, they do this on the piece which nobody goes back to. The only people who will know about this correction are people who are probably already in some way sympathetic or aware of the mistake in the first place, because all those people who just read it casually, they're not going back.
Also, super small point, but I think illustrative. Being a radio show host is totally honorable and great. And if they respected somebody, and if it was somebody else, they would say, like, I don't know, media entrepreneur,
Former
MSNBC host. I mean, it's just such a condescending BS way of describing all of the guy's accomplishments. The disdain and disingenuity still shines through.
I would argue that actually it's not so much about condescending. It is about, I think, anyone with any type of savvy knows that the people in that district who are going to vote for a Democrat, do not listen to talk radio shows because there are none for them. And that had they said former MSNBC host, that would have made a much different impression on people. Yes, absolutely. You could have put entrepreneur. I mean, they own the biggest. Yes, but it's a very odd moniker. He has not been on radio for at least a decade, as far as I can remember. Like at one point they were on Sirius XM, and that's the way the show launched. But he hasn't been on it for, I think about a decade.
The largest progressive radio show or progressive show on the internet.
Right.
But I think, and also I just would like to make a brief, I watched Anna's coverage of this yesterday on the Young Turks, including, by the way, all the other stuff that people dredge up and go over again and again and again, which range from either maybe, like a genuine mistake ages ago that the guys apologized for, or either just like hosting a radio show and having a different sense of humor, which I think people need to get real about, or another actual smear, like video of Jank saying, yes, the Armenian genocide happened. I'm sorry I wrote something obnoxious when I was in college and I grew up in a propagandized household. Of course it happened. And people tweet at me this nonsense when I go on there, whenever. It's ridiculous. And I really would watch Anna's segment. It's quite well done.
All right. So that's that. Just wanted to get that out there because, of course, many of you probably don't go back and read the same articles twice.
I think the only time I ever see a correction is if I'm late to read something.
Right. Well, of course.
I was like, oh, this came out a week ago. I'm glad I caught the correction.
Right. Exactly. The New York Times is telling you that the way you read their paper is you wait 3 or 4 days and then read it.
It's like buying a new gadget.
And it's either malicious or they're hiring some of the dumbest people on earth. I'm sorry. That's my editorial.
It's malicious people.
There is no way that you... if you watched that interview and reported it that way, then you have basic comprehension problems that would rule you out for a high school newspaper. This
is a failure of the editors, too, in a big way. Like, they didn't come across as like, wow, that's weird for a progressive guy, for a guy who's a progressive host to agree with David Duke. That strikes me as odd. Maybe we should double check that. No, but it probably makes total sense.
Let's be real. There's a lot of insane people out there who identify on the center or however they identify themselves that actually would basically equate criticizing President Obama's offer to cut Social Security with liking David Duke. So there is a very demented wing out there.
All right. Let's just also turn our attention. Mitch McConnell this morning basically said, I reject Chuck Schumer's offer of calling witnesses. The folks like Joni Ernst and Susan Collins and Cory Gardner have already come out and they're saying, like, we need to get this over with quickly. And why would they need to get it over quickly? Well, of course, because it's doing so well for them. They're so excited about taking this vote in the Senate that they want to have it happen really quick so that we can forget about it. The other thing that people should note is we are still, and this is the case with every Republican in the country who is an office holder right now, a federal office holder, the deadline to primary them has not passed. What we are seeing right now from all of these people is the most pro-Trump posture they're going to take in this cycle. Because once the primary goes, you will start to see Susan Collins try and distance herself. You will see Joni Ernst distance herself. You will see Cory Gardner distance himself. Right now is peak. Don't distance yourself from Trump unless you want to get primaried season. So this is as bold as they get, and you can still see them hedging. Let's just do this quick. I know President Trump wants a whole trial to exonerate himself. But they know what he wants is to put a tire around their neck so that as he sinks, they come with him. So I mention that only because I suspect that one of ABC's political analysts disagrees. She is a member of The View, and her attempt to push this political analysis on the rest of The View members was met with a certain amount of disdain, which I have to admit I enjoyed.
All right, we're back to the conversation. Go ahead.
What I wanted to say was, to your point about why Clinton perjured himself, is because he was willing to go under oath. Mm-hmm. Trump will not go under oath. He refuses to testify, as well as Mulvaney, Bolton, and Giuliani, all these people who are afraid to go under oath, particularly Donald. If he goes under, as I've said before, the lie machine will explode.
Joe Biden's not going under oath either, though, he said.
Joe Biden is not the crucial person here. He's not the one who's being investigated
but
right
still,
now.
If you're asked if you're subpoenaed, you should say, I'm going to do what the law says I need to do. I'm going to show up and I'm going to testify.
But in his case, it's a separate issue. It's not germane to what is going on in the Senate right now.
Yeah, and I also think...
Pause it for one second. I mean, that is an important point to note. Who could you not subpoena in this trial if you could subpoena Joe Biden? Like, honestly, like, who could you... This is a trial about Donald Trump. Who could you not subpoena? If it makes sense to subpoena Joe Biden, who could you not subpoena? Could you subpoena everyone? Could I be subpoenaed?
Subpoena everybody.
Everybody's going to be subpoenaed. But Abby Huntsman, you know, one of those reasonable Republicans, brings up Joe Biden in this context. I mean, even Hunter Biden, who I think everyone would acknowledge got that job because his last name was Biden, also not germane to the question as to whether Donald Trump was doing this. What he did, these facts are not in dispute as far as I can tell, rises to the level of impeachment. And if you want to establish Hunter Biden's guilt or innocence is irrelevant to the question as to was Donald Trump on a one-man mission to make sure to root out corruption? Why didn't he involve anyone else in the government, all the government apparatus in this country that is designed to do it? Like when the DOD says we're okay with what's going on there in terms of like funding relative to corruption, when the State Department says that, when the Office of the OMB says that, when every single facet of your government says there's no issue, and you do not communicate to them that you even have an issue. There's no Hunter Biden or Joe Biden relevance in that trial. I'm happy to have the Senate open up another investigation. Investigate it. Great. Here is, let's continue with this.
Senate right now.
Yeah, and I also think, if we're going to talk about both sides and we're going to sort of make that comparison, I think we also have to compare the Senate vote before. You had so many senators that voted to not only impeach but also convict President Clinton for, yes, perjuring himself. Yes. Many of those same people are still in the Senate. I cannot believe that they would vote to impeach and convict a sitting president for perjuring himself, and they would not vote to convict a president and remove a president who clearly wanted to use a foreign government for his own personal benefit to impede our very democracy. Right. That is the height of hypocrisy for this Republican-led Senate.
But my job
I don't understand that.
My job here is not to litigate the ethics of it. I'm an ABC political analyst along with being a View co-host. My job is to analyze the politics of it. And I'm telling you the politics of this.
But I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about the people that are senators that are in the Senate. The Republican Senate.
Here's what's happening now. We're gonna
show ever.
Girl, please stop talking. Please stop talking right now. Because you know what? What's happening? Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you.
I won't talk the rest of the show. No problem.
Okay, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. If you're going to behave like this.
I'm not behaving like anything. I'm trying to show a conservative perspective.
Yes, we understand that.
Talk,
but what you're doing.
No, I'm not.
We're not doing anything. How about this? Former FBI. We'll be right back.
We'll put up an address where you can send a muffin basket to Whoopi Goldberg. Now,
I don't think I've ever seen a 33-year-old woman be put in timeout like that.
Exactly. Before. And should be. And you know what? Kudos to ABC for getting such an adept political analyst.
I'm a political analyst.
I have two roles. I am not just a host here on The View. I am actually a political analyst.
I'm a host, John McCain's daughter.
How much you want to bet like that was like, I'm only coming back on the show if I get the title political analyst so that I can show that I know more about politics than they do.
Should we watch that part again?
Yeah.
That's nice. Senate.
But my job
I don't
here,
understand that.
My job here is not to litigate the ethics of it. I'm an ABC political analyst along with being a View co-host. My job is to analyze the politics of it. And I'm telling you,
but
the
I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about
I'm telling you, my job here.
Senators that are in the Senate.
Okay, wait a second. We queue it up. I want to get just her say I'm an ABC political analyst, and we just got to do this. Then, all right. I'm sorry, folks. This is really, I know, juvenile.
What is she wearing?
That.
My job here is not to litigate the ethics of it. I'm an ABC political analyst along with being a View co-host. My job is to analyze.
It's like, I was saying when we first saw this, there was this trend in filmmaking. I think it was really in like 2015, 2016, where you would explore the same tropes of like these horribly, basically racist 90s movies. Or, problematic, whatever, like Driving Miss Daisy or something like that. Except at the end, Morgan Freeman would say, actually, screw you. That's what just happened.
Yes.
It's like, actually, you know what? You disgusting entitled trust fund baby who, as someone who's actually here on the merits of my talent, I'm going to have you be quiet for a second.
I'm not just a trust fund baby. I'm also an ABC political analyst.
Not just a trust fund baby. I'm also an ABC political analyst.
Folks, one of today's sponsors is News Voice, which is the first ever entirely open, crowdsourced, and democratized platform for news. And you can download the app for free at newsvoice.com/majority. Look, as you know, the vast majority of news is owned by the same 5 huge corporations. And it's important to pay attention to where you're getting your news from, what their slant is, etc. And the way to do that is to compare it with other stories about the same topic. And that's exactly what News Voice helps you to keep track of. It's a free crowdsourced website and mobile app that lets you create personal news feeds and maintain a clear picture of where your news is coming from and what political slants may exist. It helps you aggregate news from corporate outlets, international outlets, local news, and independent media, giving you access to every side of the story. News Voice is fueled by its community of users. They contribute to the platform by fact-checking, submitting stories and sources that are missing. They upvote stories, and they write story summaries. You can also comment on stories, debate on politics, or debate politics, I should say, with other members. And through staying active in the community, you can level up. You can earn perks on the platform. The News Voice Play feature lets you listen to whatever that personal news feed that you create for yourself. You can listen to it every day. It's basically your own personally tailored radio station for news. News Voice is a next-generation news aggregator and social media platform that values transparency, good journalism, and productive political discussions. Get totally free access by going to newsvoice.com/majority. Put a link under this video if you're watching on YouTube. We've got it in the podcast description and more. Folks, just a reminder, you can support this show by becoming a member at jointhemajorityreport.com. When you do, you get extra content and you get the free show commercial free. All right, quick break. When we come back, professor from UCLA, Ramesh Srinivasan, on his book, Beyond the Valley, how innovators around the world are overcoming inequality and creating the tech of tomorrow. I'm going to skedaddle after the interview. Michael will take you into the fun half. Be right back after this. to the program. Author of Beyond the Valley, How Innovators Around the World Are Overcoming Inequality and Creating the Technologies of Tomorrow, Ramesh Srinivasan. Welcome to the program.
Hey, Sam. Nice to join you. Thank you for having me. I love your show.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you for being here and for writing the book. And let's just jump in with the sort of the most general question we can start with, which is what ostensibly is the promise of the internet?
Yeah. Well, the internet was supposed to be, an infrastructure, a global sort of technology that allowed all of us to bypass the hierarchies of political and economic power, right? It's a decentralized infrastructure, architecture where peer-to-peer we could communicate with one another. Meaning, Sam, you could be one node of the internet where you're based. I could be another node where I'm based, and we could create our own channels and share with one another. And in that sense, as just two random individuals, we could create, coordinate, organize across space, in theory, even across time. And in a sense, that is sort of an architecture that seems very democratic because it evades the hierarchies of political economy of, the Disneys and the Viacoms and the big corporate, gatekeepers of our media that in many cases are a threat to democracy because they make corporate self-serving, if you will, manufacturing consent type decisions around what is made visible and what isn't. So the internet is supposed to escape all of that. And the internet actually started, the first point of the internet is very near my office. I'm a professor at UCLA. And the first point of the internet, it just turned 50 years old, actually, Sam, is just right next to my office. And, it started at UCLA. The second point it was connected to at Stanford, and it blew up from there. And this is a taxpayer-funded, publicly funded network. The technology was funded by American taxpayers. I can't emphasize that enough because just like pharmaceuticals that originally came out of National Science Foundation, American taxpayer public funding, we now see the internet turned into private, corporate, I would say potentially monopolistic hands.
Right. Socialize the cost, privatize the profits, and so.
Yep. And give nothing back, give very little back.
Is there, and to a certain extent, your book is tracking almost like, the path not taken, I guess, on some level, in places that it has been taken on some level, as examples. But was this inevitable? As you look at this, and I know this is, this sort of more, not necessarily fully in your portfolio, but was it inevitable? Were there key junctures where a decision was made that could have gone the other way?
Yeah, absolutely. There absolutely within, again, technology is never about technology itself, right? Technology is created by people, by organizations based on political and economic values and priorities, right? So, the internet, if you layer the internet on top of, kind of American globalized capitalism and neoliberalism, you can start to see what the internet turned into, which is it's still awesome, like your show is, I'm able to access your great show by the internet. I work with the Young Turks very closely. We're very much internet based, etc. Right? You can see that. The issue, though, is if you layer it on top of the fact that in the United States and actually across the world, private corporations are elevated to such high status and such high treatment that by definition are self-serving. What ended up happening is as all the information exploded on the internet, it became exponentialized. Private corporations became our so-called solutions to make sense of it all, right? We would search for information because there was so much information out there, but we trusted a private corporation to do that. We would hang out and interact with one another on Facebook, which is a private corporation. But the only reason we go onto YouTube, we go onto Google, we go onto Facebook is to see what one another are posting, right? But a private corporation lies in the middle that is dedicated to one thing and one thing only, its bottom line, its profitability, and its speculated valuation, because some tech companies like Uber are not actually very profitable, but they're worth over $100 billion, right? So the private corporate layer on top of this architecture of decentralization is part of how we got to this point. So that is what we need to kind of roll back a little bit and start to think about, what kind of internet do we want? Sure, supportive of businesses is fine, but should it come at the cost of everything else? Because what we've allowed now is the private corporations to make decisions that are in their own self-benefit that maybe they don't even intend in and of themselves, but have turned out to have sociopathic outcomes, right? Like algorithmic, inflammatory and hateful content becoming that which goes viral online, or setting up a mechanism for super shady and sketchy third parties like Cambridge Analytica or the Russian government to manipulate what we see on Facebook, or setting up these mechanisms by which inflammatory, hateful, racist, colonial type of content can become the basis for smear campaigns, with Rodrigo Duterte and Jair Bolsonaro, and now in India with Narendra Modi. So these issues are massive at scale. And the problem is if we let private, self-centered, self-interested corporations to make the decisions about our public lives, which are increasingly interwoven with the internet, we're asking for trouble. And that's why we have to balance this. And that's what I'm arguing for in Beyond the Valley in the new book.
And so, but I guess what I'm trying to get, and I want to go back over, some of that, but for instance, when the combustible engine was developed, let's say that it had been developed by the U.S. government, and there were certainly decisions that were made at that time, certainly, and by the U.S. government, of how we're going to use the combustible engine. Is it going to be primarily something that's going to create public transport, or is it going to be used for individual vehicles? And we're going to build highways and road systems that are like this. If we have trolleys that are going, that are on tracks, we're going to dig up those tracks in the city and we're going to pave it over. Like, it seems to me like, did we have a similar moment? And I don't know that we even had that moment. I'm just using that. I'm making that up in terms of the combustible engine. But did we have a moment where there were certain decisions that we could have made that, in terms of a framework, that allowed for this overlay of corporate interest that began to dictate the shape and the form and the way that we access the internet, and the sort of like both, Facebook and these other mediums are bridges to other people, but they're sort of like they're tunnels, and there's tolls, and it eliminates the room for other bridges and tunnels that don't necessarily have tolls.
Yeah, it's a great question. So a couple different moments. I think a first major moment occurred when decisions were made very intelligently by companies to become our go-tos for the internet without charging us anything, right? So you can see sort of the Netflix model, which still collects data on you, but then you can see, more importantly, the Google model, right? Which is instead treats us as the product, right? We are the product being sold to one another. So that was something that started to come into being, Sam, about Google's about 20 years old, but this really took off, I would say, about 15 or so years ago. So that is one major, flashpoint where there was an implicit acceptance by everybody that that a free internet is equivalent to a free search engine, even if we now find out it is disastrous for our freedom.
Right.
So that's one. But then another, here's a huge transition that occurred, honestly, is the mass consumption and the mass purchasing and release of smartphones. Huge impact, right? Especially the iPhone. And why is that? Because now, as all of us are carrying these phones around in our pockets, we are not only trackable, but we are constantly 24/7, 365 releasing and emitting data to these big data systems, to these server farms, to these cloud computing networks. And as we did that, it represented a qualitative shift where we gave up a great deal of our own personal sovereignty, but also communities that would be at risk, to be biased against by these algorithmic systems became more and more at risk.
So
and I can talk about that.
Well, yeah, I want to talk about that. I just let me just put a flag down here and say that had we in that early era, and I was around and during the first .com bubble when people were still trying to figure it out on some level, had we in that era basically said, you can't collect data, you cannot collect geotagging data. You cannot have cookies. You can't do anything that isn't directly a function of providing better, like a very narrowly tailored definition of what better service is. So if I show back up on your website, you can keep me, you can have me have a login type of situation, but you can't follow me around the internet. And so therefore it makes the whole model where it's like, if you're not paying for it, then you're the product. It makes that just simply not available to these companies. And in that case, they're going to have to figure out another way of monetizing the internet. And so it's not going to be through tracking us.
Exactly. So you're onto it, Sam. I mean, it's partly that we gave up our data thinking that it was just for advertisements, but it's partly that we didn't understand that an advertisement is not the same as an advertisement. Now I'm being a little glib, but what do I mean by that? So, okay, Facebook has certain data on me or Google has certain data on me and they're going to sell me, quote unquote, better soap or better shoes or better cars or whatever. Americans more or less, and actually a lot of consumers around the world are more or less okay with that. We have an understanding that things are being gathered about us that influence so-called personalized advertising. But that is not actually what's happening here. What is happening is far more pernicious. Here's what's happening. Data is being retained about us at all points in our life. Where that data goes and how that data is being used is a big unknown to us. The fact that we can combine and aggregate data about us is also something that people don't know about, right? For example, Sam, I can buy your credit card records and monitor you on your smartphone and monitor you on, various applications like Facebook and so on. And I can aggregate that data. And I can have data, I don't know if you're in your 40s or 50s or 30s. Say if I have data about you from when you're 18 years old, and I can have that data and I can use that data. So what does that create in composite? It's not the same as selling someone, one soap versus another. It creates the possibility to structure and influence your life behaviorally, politically, economically, even personally and psychologically in ways that have great power and control over you. That is why this is such a big problem. And that is why there's so much more at risk. And it's not just about, we need to regulate Facebook. It's much more about the fundamental questions of people who has power over our lives and how do we want to have governance over our lives. And it's those issues that are at stake here. And this is why this industry, if you look at it as a whole, represents the most, the highest valuated companies outside of this new Saudi, company, oil company, which is the state company, the most valuable companies in the history of the world. Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, to some extent Microsoft. Look at their valuation. And why are they so powerful? It's not because of selling their services, as we already talked about. It's because of what that data means, the valuation of that data, not just with advertising, but in all forms of life. Because we do know as human beings, when we are fed certain stimuli, right, like all of us, when you see something or hear something or it changes your mind. It influences us. We are social animals. So when we are put down these behavioral rabbit holes that suit corporate interests, but also support super sketchy interests like Russian government who wants to radicalize us and turn our entire society into something that's kind of very divided, then you can see the impact of that at play. For the record, I'm not even trying to overplay the Russian thing because I haven't read much evidence showing its actual material impact on our election. And I've talked to Noam Chomsky about that very issue.
Well, I want to talk about that, but I think like this point of what the implications are and just how it's how it's impacting us structurally. It's almost like it's beyond individuals because And I just, we talk about the phones. I just read that there is an outfit in Texas. Apparently, the Trump campaign is using them. Apparently, there was a Democrat and a Republican politician who was using them in the 2018 election, which tracks people on their phones. And I think people should know this. Virtually every app, except for the Majority Report app, as far as, I can guarantee that one. But virtually every app that you get, there is a packet. I think they call it SDK or whatever it is. Right. It sends all this information about you, where you're going, where, it has your maps, and it tells, and it collects this data, and then they sell it to hedge funders or to companies or whatever. It's just like a completely sort of overlaid side business. And what it does, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but they will structure our days. Not, as individuals, they don't care about us. But as human beings going through basically what they perceive as just sort of a lifestyle that will maximize their profits, they will put the supermarkets in this location because they know a certain number of us go by there. That can be good in some instances, but in other instances, it can mean that any other values that we have as a society, what is good for the community, should we have a park, because maybe it's better to have a park there than it is to have a supermarket. All of these things are being structured on such a sort of almost a transcendent, on one level, a transcendent level, and another on such a subterranean level that it is influencing the trajectory of human development, much in the way that our economic systems does, but even more narrowly tailored to the benefit of very, very narrow group of people.
That's right. Because what you can do is, again, the ability to have such rich data and be able to compute on that data to make behavioral decisions around how to steer people, how to influence their minds, how to influence not just what they purchase, but how they politically perceive themselves, politically perceive one another, even their qualifications. We are using algorithmic and AI systems based on data trails and digital footprints that are gathered about people to make decisions about people's worthiness, their credit worthiness, right? These are experiments that are underway in China, but they're not that different than what's occurring now. We can make predictions using digital footprints about whether, what kind of insurance you're worth. How risky is it to invest in you and your life, Sam? We can make those kinds of decisions. So what are we finding out? Those systems again and again and again are perpetuating, normalizing, and even worsening the inequalities of our country. They're criminalizing black people. They're taking black people who don't have felony records and predicting that they're going to have felony records or giving them harsher court sentences. That's in courtroom algorithmic systems. We're deploying AI systems for predictive policing that are treating Latino neighborhoods in East LA, like right near where I live, as gangs, even if there's no actual gang, quote unquote, gang behavior from any sort of, I would say, reasonable interpretation. So what is happening is a Minority Report type situation where, combined with the Hunger Games, where it's like those people who have always been treated worse in our unequal country, in our imperfect union, if you will, are even worsened through these systems. And the worst part of it all, and here's the key point, is because it's technology and data, everybody just thinks it's neutral. They're like, oh, this is better than a judge, or this is better than the police. The problem is what is occurring here is a tool that is taking police brutality and courtroom injustices and the prison, prison pipelines, et cetera, and actually normalizing and making them worse. And so technologies right now are an amplifier for injustice and inequality, and we sure as heck need to get this right. And that is what this book is about. That's why I wrote Beyond the Valley.
And the distance from human beings doing this makes it less and less accountable as it progresses forward.
Great point. Because the developers of these systems and the companies that have created these systems tend to again reinforce inequalities in our country and world. Most engineers are male. That's a widely known bias that women are under-equipped or unequipped to be scientists and engineers. We found out that AI systems are constantly selecting men over women for technology and science jobs like automated systems. So the biases are reinforcing themselves. The fact that it's generally white, almost always male, sometimes Asian, and also the class-based, we're talking about very wealthy people who don't necessarily, even if they're great people, don't really understand the experiences of others. And we're also talking about geographic biases, right? So if the world is socially engineered from Shanghai, Seattle, and Silicon Valley, and these technologies are just thrust upon billions of people. Remember, over 1/3 of the world's population uses Facebook, and Facebook owns Instagram and WhatsApp is very widely used across the global South. These biases are going to be geographically pernicious. So this is a way of extracting and harvesting data. It's a new type, I would say, of digital colonialism. And we really have a huge opportunity to get this right, because I'm not even trying to get into this space of just yelling at people or calling people out for being, and claiming that they're sociopathic or ascribing intentions to anyone. I'm an engineer by training, a lot of friends in the engineering space, and I know that a lot of us just don't know about these issues or don't know how to deal with these issues, which is why, again, I wrote Beyond the Valley, because my arguments in this book are, what if predictive policing, if we even wanted it, was designed by Black Lives Matter? What if, Sam Seder and the Majority Report got to be part of the algorithm design for Facebook's newsfeed that promotes journalistic content? Why are you all absent from the processes of design and the processes of auditing these systems? You all are just basically subjects of these systems. All of us are blind, and that is not appropriate. That's unjust, and that's not balanced.
And it is going to exponentially exacerbate inequalities and flaws in our society, because we have engineers making an algorithm based upon what exists on a data form, if you will, without any contextualization as to it didn't have to be this way. There can be an alternate reality that, if you were to create, as an example, like an algorithm as to, who we're going to serve, whose interests we're going to serve, and you were to do this in, let's say, 1859 in the southern states, it would be geared. You would set up a system that would perpetuate slavery, and you could step back and say, like, well, look, this is completely neutral. I'm not for or against slavery. I'm just looking at the data as it exists now, and I'm using that as a tool to build about how we can make things more efficient and maximize them. That's an extreme example, but that's the dilemma that we have in relying on these type of this type of engineering.
You've captured it beautifully. I think you're completely on point with that. And that's why there are false comparisons being raised. So when I raise these issues, right, of, algorithmic AI systems being used in courtrooms or police departments, or, these things, by the way, Sam, are everywhere. These AI systems, we don't even know when we're interacting with AI systems, and we don't even know, there isn't disclosure when we're interacting with things like facial recognition systems, which across the board have turned out to be racist, by the way, and are being used by ICE to try to round up so-called undocumented immigrants who in many cases do have documents but are misidentified as being undocumented because the mugshot databases in our unequal country are full of Black and brown people, right? So I get in kind of arguments or discussions with people around this, and they say, hey, well, it's a technology, technology is there something we need to improve upon, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. Sure, we should improve upon the status quo. But you're asking the wrong question. You're not the comparison of whether a racist judge or a racist algorithm is better is an inappropriate way of framing the issue. The question should be what kind of world or society we want to live in. Let's come together around that, a progressive agenda that actually the majority of Americans believe in, and let's design and build and influence and regulate technologies in that image. The question shouldn't be, oh, well, a racist algorithm is better than a racist judge. That is a very, a very sad way of describing what we can do.
But I mean, to me, a racist algorithm is far more problematic than a racist judge.
Sure.
Because a racist judge can die and be replaced by a different judge. A racist judge can see can all of a sudden gain a different awareness. And a racist judge is subject to other human beings questioning them and not perceiving him or her, that racist judge, as being, value neutral. The problem with a racist algorithm is the lay people can't make that assessment, A. B, as the algorithm operates, all the data that it pumps out, all the solutions that it finds are then used again as the basis. And it's almost like you're tracing a figure. And every time you trace around that figure, every time that data that goes through that box, it gets even more exaggerated because it becomes the basis of, it was based on a flawed input. And then the flawed input puts a flawed output out, and so on and so on and so on. And
that's right. It's recursive. It's recursive, and it actually magnifies the problem because it's a feedback loop. That's exactly what you're describing. Exactly.
All right. Well, so we've talked about the problem, and but your book is largely about here's the other thing that we could be doing.
Yeah, totally.
And it culminates in your Data Bill of Rights, which I want to get to, but I want to just talk about a couple of things. I had not heard about the Red Hook Brooklyn Wi-Fi thing. I am aware of the New York City Mesh, NYC Mesh, which is a similar thing, I think. But let's start in Kenya though first. We'll go to Kenya and then we'll go to Red Hook.
Sure.
Tell us, why did you go to Kenya? What is it in Kenya that's happening that's relevant to this conversation?
Yeah. So the continent with the youngest population in the world, fastest growing population in the world, and fastest spread of the internet in the world is the African continent. And it's kind of a weird thing to even call Africa a single entity because it's the most biodiverse, linguistically diverse, culturally diverse part of the world. It's a mind blower. I've been all over the continent, and it's just incredible. On a systemic level, this is an important point I make in Beyond the Valley. The internet doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from fiber optic cables that are underneath the ocean surface. And the continent of Africa is actually very underconnected to the continent of South America. In other words, the fiber optic cables are very similar to the way that economic power functions in the world. Everything's connected through Europe and so on, right? So that's an important point. However, in the country of Kenya, very near Mombasa, which is the largest port in East Africa, massive port, there is a fiber optic cable landing point. It's a cable that also connects to eastern Tanzania in the Serengeti area. The reason I give this background is the ability to connect high-speed internet is not some sort of panacea in and of itself, as we've spoken about. But by the way, I do want to make the point that the connections that we get in America on mobile and internet, and this is something we're talking about in the Sanders campaign, are much, much worse than actually what is possible. They're like 20 times slower than what they have in South Korea. But nonetheless, back to Kenya. There is a landing point, and here's the reality. The combination of that accessibility combined with a culture of actual innovation. The reason I use the term innovator in the title of this new book, Beyond the Valley, that I wrote, is because I'm taking the term back. I'm asking what innovation actually is. And what you see in the country of Kenya is everyone is hustling. And that could be a term that people think of in a negative way, but I mean it in a positive way. People are doing more with less. They're trying to figure out ways to bring some income in, to create businesses, to create all sorts of civic opportunities. And there's a strong history there of businesses that are collectively or cooperatively owned. People have found solutions to overcome the constraints they face, from the electrical grid to the absence of banking systems, etc. They've built mobile money systems, and I'm not talking about cryptocurrencies, but people are literally trading credits. People are innovators. They're innovating through constraint. And so what is happening in Kenya? People are realizing here are the constraints we face, but here's what we can build out of it. So I give a few examples of this in the book. I'll say these really briefly. One is, you see this actually in other parts of the world as well, even in LA where I live, Los Angeles where I live. People are taking dead electronics, things that we throw away, things that are designed to die, because Apple devices are designed to die. It's called planned obsolescence. It's not that different than a Monsanto seed, which is designed to die. It's horrific to me. And what are they doing with it? Instead of just having this be e-waste that everyone gets cancer from and destroys the environment, people are taking apart these technologies and building new technologies out of them. This is what they call jua kali, or which means hot sun. There are people who have tables and soldering guns under the sun, and it's an informal economy where they're just creating businesses out of this, everyone is just trying to repair phones, recycle phones, create new electronics. Not just true with phones, people are doing this with tires and desks and televisions and metal of all forms. It's so inspiring to see that whole new way of thinking of a secondary and tertiary economy that people do through their creativity. So that's one layer. But if you take this to another layer, you won't believe this. I have seen people, and I write about this in Beyond the Valley, literally taking discarded, dumpstered, they don't have dumpsters there, but basically, like recycle, like dumpster diving for e-waste, and have built 3D printers out of these things, 60% out of e-waste. And they have built functioning 3D printers that have incubated a new industry for 3D printing on the continent and across East Africa. The 3D printers are a fraction of the cost of American and Chinese printers. And here's the killer part. They work way better. Because they're designed by innovators who understand the environment within which they're designing for. The closure, there's the distance between the developer of the technology and the people and environments where the technology lives is closed. And that's the major problem we have with tech today. And in Kenya, you see alternatives. You see people using solar power to spread Wi-Fi. You see, I'm sure you've seen this in different parts of the world, Sam. You just get on the street corner and there'll be a van going some direction. You're not really sure exactly where it's going. You just get in the van, you tell the person where you're going. One guy takes your money, another one is driving, and they tell you where to get off, and then maybe you take another van. This is a kind of innovation where people are hustling and they're figuring out ways to innovate. All of these are collectively. That's all.
Ramesh, hold on. We're having a little bit of a problem here.
Sure.
Okay, go ahead. Sorry. We just, you broke up. Go ahead.
Okay, sure. So it allows me to raise questions in Beyond the Valley, like, what if Uber was at least partially, if not completely, owned by its drivers?
Right.
So basically in Kenya, you can see these alternative models for technological innovation that are sustainable, that are environmentally conscious, that are inclusive of everybody. And that, I think, is really important to understand, that the blueprint for technology is not defined by our own trauma at this point.
Well, so what's preventing, I've watched this, specific, let's just talk about Uber in that respect, and we can maybe sort of get into a couple of points about the Data Bill of Rights. Yep. What is, when Uber first came on the scene, I kept hearing, I would talk to the Uber drivers, and some of them were like, yeah, there's some guys in Florida, and they're trying to do a co-op version of this. And I've seen competitors come and go. Juno just closed shop in New York, which was a real shame, because to a certain extent, they were giving better deal to their drivers. But it occurs to me, well, look, the technology is there. Why can't, what is preventing, or what do we need for there to be a cooperative driver-owned version of Uber in this instance? Is it we need to constrict Uber, or is it that we need a plan to where government offers here's a $2 million loan. If you can show that you've developed a co-op of drivers, we'll give you $2 million. You'll have the operating costs for the first year or whatever it is, 6 months. And as cash comes in, you pay off the loan. What do we need to achieve that?
Yeah, definitely. Well, part of the reason why we've turned to Uber and become reliant on Uber and Lyft and so on is because they have so much, they're operating at such large scale that it allows them to price fix in a way to get us as consumers to be hooked onto their services. Obviously, all of these tech companies offer a lot of efficiency, and I need to make that point. That's part of the reason why we use them. So Uber is a great example of that, right? There is some evidence that Uber prices are artificially low because of investment to get us hooked onto Uber so that more data is provided to Uber, which then allows a company like Uber to be the top dog in, for example, the automated vehicle industry. So this is a model that seems good for consumers, but in reality, at scale is actually very disastrous for workers, because the workers are in big trouble. for everybody. Everybody in the society is in trouble as a result. No unionization, no living wage, no benefits, no insurance unless drivers are in the car. They're all dispensable. These workers are dispensable. They're cogs in a machine that will ultimately be run by computational and automated systems. Now, to contrast that with what you're suggesting, it is absolutely critical we figure out ways to incentivize alternative models of ownership and equity in relation to enterprises of all kinds and businesses of all kinds. And increasingly, businesses are all going to have some big data and AI kind of social media type component to them. So yes, absolutely. I think what we need to do is figure out ways, and the state can help us with this, of incentivizing alternatives that people can turn to so that as consumers, we can start shifting away from this Uber model toward using a model of Uber, which is like efficient and lots of people can use it and very, kind of good for consumers, but without the costs to the workers, without the costs to the larger society. And I think that is the key here. We have proposed some legislation, or I would say policy proposal as part of Senator Sanders' 2020 campaign that came out last week on what we call Internet for All. And within that, there is an incentivization financially to support community networks, municipal run networks, right? Imagine your Verizons and AT&Ts, but instead they're run by local community organizations, or, like you were saying, NYC Mesh. But an NYC Mesh that has a lot of power because it has the funding and support behind it. We're even trying to incentivize Native American populations to support their own infrastructures like internet and mobile telephony infrastructures. So I think there are ways to balance this out and move away from this point where we're like blindly forced onto and dependent on these tech platforms that turn out to be very bad and unhealthy for our society and actually our world. And part of it is by shifting through policy, but also by giving others a chance, by giving small businesses a chance, by giving nonprofits a chance, by giving collectives a chance. Because it's actually small businesses that hire far more people, Sam, than any other form of enterprise in our country. They are the key to job growth.
So
and the right kind of job growth.
I mean, largely what you're talking about is almost like a two-step, maybe not necessarily sequential, maybe simultaneous, both an antitrust perspective on these things to curb their size, to undercut their ability. I mean, if we were just tomorrow to say, can't sell data, can't share data, can't collect data, can't sell data, except for maybe a very narrow band of data, and essentially made a lot of these businesses just simply not lucrative, not worth pursuing. A bunch would go away. A bunch would innovate and redirect where they're going. But then also on the other side, incentivize, provide government assistance to people who are innovating other ways of making a business out of this stuff that is less, that has less of an ability to redirect where society is going and more like getting cues from society as to where it should go.
Exactly. And, what actually Uber did is designed its way around the minimum wage law by calling its employees independent contractors. Right. And so it's an all hands on deck situation. We have to support a more competitive environment where we can't just be we can't just be disrupted in a very negative way by the dominance and hidden and unaccountable actions of tech companies that are completely self-serving and Wall Street backed. We have to, it's all hands on deck. Competitive environment, regulatory environment, and more importantly, just introducing alternative imaginaries and understandings into what technology is and who it serves. I have no fundamental issue with machine learning or AI. I was an AI and machine learning developer back in the day. The issue is all about who governs it and who has power over it. Of course, we can apply great big data and various types of algorithms to understand climate data, for example. But the boundaries of that question need to be, the way we put it is deterministic, meaning they have to be very specific, right? We're looking for this with these parameters. We're controlling this very importantly. Most importantly of all, we need to ensure that human beings and the right kinds of human beings that also are very invested in the public interest are the ones in charge of these technologies. That is essential. They audit it, they design it, they regulate it, they make sure that the technologies only have this amount of use, only access this amount of data. We check this thing very carefully because what we're doing is, these companies claim to be engineering for society, but what they're actually doing, Sam, is social engineering.
Right. Right. All right. Well, so lastly, let me ask you this. I know you're a surrogate for Bernie Sanders. To what extent, I mean, you've talked about, sort of antitrust, but you've also talked about a government taking a bigger role in the development of technologies and ways of interacting with the internet that are after the regulatory reform, sort of narrower corridors in some ways, but that's going to open up areas that we don't know. I mean, this is, back when I was in filmmaking, Dogma 95, you had limitations, technologically that, you self-imposed, but it changed the nature of your storytelling. And in some ways, that's what we're looking for here. Where does Bernie Sanders fit in on that? In that?
Yeah. I mean, it's very, very clear to all of us. I think really across the country that Senator Sanders stands alone as the person who has the track record, unwavering message that stands with the working class and the middle class, and actually, I want to add small businesses. He is the person who forever, I'm sure you've watched some of his, interviews from the 80s. It's uncanny. We know what he stands for, right? And we know that his interests are not in government takeover of everything, but his interests are in government making sure that the excesses and the greed and the sociopathic outcomes of big corporate America don't end up harming a situation that has gotten so bad, right? He says, this is a Bernie line, but three people with the equivalent wealth to over 50% of the U.S. population. Now, the internet and new technology was a catalyst of that occurring, and it's going to get way worse, as we've spoken about, right? If you notice, some of the wealthiest people in the world have all made their money in some facet or other involving the internet. And if we see these forces of displacing workers through the gig economy and automation starting to come into being, we're going to see workers that are even more precarious, our country even more divided, even more full of anxiety. So we start with what Sanders stands for, which is working people, middle class people, and then we think about technology and the digital economy and the economy of all kinds accordingly. So what Senator Sanders has put out is pretty incredible. As part of the Green New Deal, there is a lot of investment, as I mentioned earlier, into infrastructures that are governed for and by people. Now, infrastructure is kind of a nerdy and boring term, but what I mean is, mobile networks, internet networks, those things are accruing so much money. So why can't the wealth that's created by that and the jobs and the employment and the digital literacy skills and the educational skills all be transferred back to communities and organizations, the right kinds of stakeholders who are not just invested in their own pocketbooks, but everybody else? So that's one example of what Sanders has proposed that I think blows everyone else out of the water. Another big example of this is his corporate accountability plan and his workplace democracy plans. These are really important because what he's actually asking for in these policies, I encourage everybody to take a look at these, is providing employees and workers greater equity, investment, even board seats in our enterprises. Bernie is not anti-business. He's not even anti-corporations per se. He wants these things to be fairer and equitable and supportive of working people, of the 99%. So one way to do that is to take this great model that has created a lot of great innovations, which is the business, even the for-profit business, and make sure that it's not extractive and it's not zero-sum, that the people who are part of those organizations have, who are the employees of those organizations, have great power over what the decisions those organizations make. So these are the kinds of themes of digital inclusion, of internet for all, that are really part of this campaign. And he pays particular attention, and this is actually, I would say, even different than 2016, at vulnerable communities in our country. There's a lot of stuff out there in these policies and proposals to support Native American people, to support women in poverty, to deal with prison issues, to deal with youth issues, but also to deal with vulnerable people of color and minority communities. So all of these policies have an eye of compassion toward giving everybody an equal opportunity. I mean, that's the America that he believes in and I believe in. And I think that's why this campaign is standing alone. And my goal in the campaign is to just be a voice to support the great policies that we're putting out, and to also add my 2 cents on policies that might relate to my areas of expertise. I have a piece coming out, Sam, I think in the next week, in The Guardian, called Why We Need a Digital Bill of Rights. And within that, I'll describe some aspects of what Senator Sanders, Bernie, has proposed, but it's more generally a blueprint to make sure that we get everything balanced. Beyond the Valley, my new book, is about restoring balance to this digital world. It's not just a book that criticizes and trashes and vilifies the status quo. It paves the way toward a world where everybody is uplifted through technology, rather than more division, more inequality, more injustice through the digital world.
Ramesh Srinivasan, the book is Beyond the Valley, How Innovators Around the World Are Overcoming Inequality and Creating the Technologies of Tomorrow. We'll put a link at majority.fm. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Really appreciate it.
Nice.
That was a great interview. You're a great interviewer. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks.
Nice. And big cosign. That is a great book. I discovered Ramesh's work through Anna Kasparian, and he actually, I think he's also a Sanders surrogate. He is. He's a very, very smart guy. We're going to go right to the fun half, folks. Not a huge amount of time because everything ran pretty long. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how all this happens. Less than a cup of coffee a day. Subscribe on YouTube if you haven't already. Go to justcoffee.coop. Fair trade tea, coffee, or chocolate. Tonight, we're live 7 o'clock on TMBS. Go to the Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Go to patreon.com/TMBS to check out our new illicit history of AMLO's first year in office and using the drug war to potentially foment a coup against him. Of course, got our upcoming Bell House show February 7th, but we just wanted to let you really quickly know that there's a new website out here. Just went up. Want to thank David Alexander, our super talented intern, but professional photographer for TMBS, who helped put the website together. And TMBS.fm, we've got a catalog where you can buy hoodies and merch. Nice tees, nice hoodies. Of course, there's a Become a Member. And you can see descriptions of our latest shows. And then if you go up on the menu, you can keep track of live shows, our catalog, YouTube, Patreon, and also the upcoming book. So where you can see all the blurbs that we have so far. So anyways, guys, check it out, tmbs.fm. Jamie.
Oh, that reminds me. We too have merch for sale at the Antifada. It's a little more ad hoc. It's also a little bit cheaper. We have some t-shirts left. So if you want to DM our producer, Andy, at Space Prol on Twitter, he can set you up with some. Anyway, this week on the Antifada, where unrest is best, we have an interview with Alex Vitale, author of The End of Policing, about the history of the modern police state, why liberal reforms have been insufficient or downright counterproductive, and what would need to happen to actually get at the root of these problems, as well as the ongoing protests against the NYPD in New York City that Andy and I have been a part of. We also have a new bonus up for our patrons. It is Andy's series on Latin America. This month, he's got Camilo Gomez, a Peruvian writer, discussing how the Lava Jato spilled onto Peru, making anti-corruption a focus of the upcoming legislative elections. They talk a bit about the Peruvian left, and then they go into some idiosyncratic tendencies like the Trotskyist eco-socialism of ex-Posadist Hugo Blanco and the UFO leftism of Alpha E Omega. And that is out now, patreon.com/theantifada. Also, tomorrow we have an episode coming out on the Russian revolutionary Victor Serge.
Matt.
Yeah, coming up on Literary Hangover is the second most published book in English of all time, Pilgrim's Progress by John Bunyan, written in 1670s. Basically, it's sort of the Lord of the Rings of that sort of 200-year period where the guy goes on a journey. A very similar sort of thing in meets obstacles and sort of things like that. But I think it's about Christianity.
It does a tremendous job.
It's about Christianity, but really it could be about anybody on a sort of ideological journey. And I think that's how I took some meaning out of it. So look forward to that, folks.
Cool. Everybody go to patreon.com.
Patreon.com/literary hangover.
Do you still put them on YouTube too?
They're still on YouTube, yeah. Up to about 3,000 subs on there.
Go over there, click subscribe. Subscribe to everybody's show on iTunes if you haven't already. That also helps. All right, folks, we're going to see you in the fun half.
You are in for it. All right, folks, 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Almost says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danergy's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danergy.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
psych. Fuck 'em.
Almost says what?
What?
Almost says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
The alpha males are back. And the Africans are black Africans. The alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Welcome to the fun half. I'm sorry, I still need to call into the phone system. Be doing that right now, but let's start with a little bit of fun. Steve King, who has not been hiding the ball, let's say, There's nothing crypto about his politics, in my opinion.
He's actually been disciplined by the Republican Party for being too racist. So.
Yes, that's a sort of like, I don't know. I don't even know what the analogy is. It's like disciplined by like FIFA for doping or something. Like I don't like disciplined by FIFA for building the stadium with slave labor, except that still, of course, has not happened.
Disciplined by the beach for being too sandy.
Disciplined by the beach. Yeah, that works. I like that one. But in addition to being a reprehensible human being, he's also gullible as hell. This has happened a lot. He is a very he's an easy target on Twitter, is all I'll say.
Yeah, he's quick to the quote retweet.
He's quick to the quote retweet. And I think, do we have our supplementary sounds for this? Because it echoes a really important story we had covered last year. But
this is a genre of trolling that I think we may see. This may be the peak of it, actually.
I think this may be a peak of it. This speaks to, I mean, actually, Ronald Reagan had a tweet thread yesterday where apparently there's like a new thing where cops are complaining about not getting served promptly enough in Starbucks. And basically Reagan was like, yeah, but we do realize that Trump is going to basically run a re-election and win on this. It's just like, I saw him. He was right out of central casting.
Now their delivery times for lattes are down 10% since I took office.
10%.
Yeah, 10%. They got to learn to play the long game on that one.
So here is at Mueller Dad 69. I like how it's just like, you do kind of have to learn to maybe listen to somebody's title a little bit.
Like maybe either the 69 or the Mueller Dad. Like one of those things should have tipped off.
No, but in fairness to Steve King, he's probably not up on the latest of sort of
weird Twitter,
weird Twitter lefty bro humor. But I'm a manager of a Mueller Dad 69 writes, I'm the manager of a Starbucks in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I've informed my employees that they will be fired on the spot if I hear them say Merry Christmas to any customers. I'm doing it because I personally dislike conservative Christians. Okay. And Steve King is, of course, somehow discovers this. I mean, I get, because this isn't even tweeted at him.
This is, it looks like he took a screenshot from Facebook.
He took a screenshot from Facebook and he wrote, wow, this guy hates our president and now is attacking Christians. Who's next? Please share. And the reason I paused is because there is 3 periods after who's next.
It's nice to know that our fascist overlords are also just as confused as any other boomer about how to use the internet.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, this is a very interesting medium of basically playing to conservative self-victimization and paranoia. And it reminded us of, well, let's just say, I mean, a very amusing prank that the Your Kickstarter Sucks podcast did last year. And it all started with this post. I think they put it on Facebook.
Correct, yep.
My uncle actually owns a Red Hen franchise in South Bend, Indiana, and told me that when he drops chickens on the ground, he transfers it into a special bucket and serves it to Trump supporters when they come in. Laugh my ass off. LMAO.
That's in Rules for Radicals, actually. A special chicken bucket.
I first read about the chicken bucket for Nixon supporters in Abby Hoffman's book. I love that, though, because there's at least 3 different steps that you should be okay, there's a special bucket. How often are they putting chicken on the floor in this restaurant? How do they know if somebody's a Trump supporter? There's a lot of tells.
Why do they put their phone number at the end of the post? Why do they put their
phone number at the end of the post? Why? There's so many things that a conservative could think to themselves, yes, of course, we are totally under siege. But maybe that seems a little bit credibility stretching. But luckily for us, several people did not have that response, and they called that number.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I wouldn't be shopping at your restaurant anyways, you idiot.
So I just want to let you know that there's an individual named who was posted on Twitter, and it says here, my uncle actually owns a Red Red Hen franchise in South Bend, Indiana, and told me that when he drops chicken on the ground, he transfers it to a special bucket and serves it to a Trump supporters where they come in. So, where is, who is that individual?
That's me.
That's you?
Yeah.
And you drop chicken. When you drop chicken onto the ground, you put it in a special bucket and you serve it to Trump supporters.
Well, he wasn't.
Because that is what your nephew is saying.
Yeah. He's kind of got a big mouth. I apologize. He wasn't really supposed to tell everybody that, but.
Well, I'll tell you what, man. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find the people in, because, I'm not necessarily a big Trump supporter, but I do believe in our electoral and Republican process. Not the Republican Party, but our Republican form of government. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I inform the entire Indiana State Board of Health on your practices.
Okay.
And I don't know who the fuck you people think you are, but look, what do you think, we're going to take this bullshit, dude? Is that what you think? You think we're going to take this bullshit from you?
Did you call to place an order, or?
No. I call to let you know that my name is and I am going to have your place shut down, you scumbag.
Okay. Because we are...
That is what I am doing.
We're closed right now, so you'd have to call back.
I don't give a flying fuck what you want. You're closed right now. You better get used to the feeling of being closed, because I am going to be on your ass like white on rice.
Not necessarily a Trump supporter, though. Big
Oh my
caveat.
God. I love, why do they always feel the need to do that? Like, I don't understand. I don't feel a need to go, and I'm not even necessarily voting for Bernie Sanders.
Because
I guess just stop. Because you like Trump. Shut up.
Deep down, they know it's something to be ashamed of.
Well,
unlike
right.
Bernie Sanders.
Yeah, that's right.
This is like why Pete Buttigieg staffers say, like, we love our country too, just because we like Bernie Sanders supporters don't have to say that because
other people don't have to say, we actually care about terrestrial human beings.
Methinks the corporate ghoul doth protest too much.
Right.
Exactly. We care about our country too. We just don't want to pay for everybody to get health care.
Right. Buttigieg for all who want him. That's a good one. Right-wingers can never pull off this self-parody trolling because they are real-life parodies. All right, let's take a call. You are calling from a 352 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, it's Mark from Gainesville.
Hey, Mark, what's going on? Mark from Gainesville. What's on your mind?
Yes, I actually mentioned this to you on your show via Super Chat, but it's, I believe, the most important thing we can do to get Bernie Sanders elected is to broadcast on your show, Sam's show, everybody, that they need to register as Democrats in closed and semi-closed primary states.
Right. I think you're right. And I think we do need to get on that more. And I'll make my pitch actually just generally that, look, some places, and I don't know this, there are some places that I think have pretty open voting systems. And then if if it's like psychologically important to be independent or whatever, then do that. But like in a place like New York, which we should have there's a structural, there's a much bigger structural critique of, frankly, the barriers for parties and so on. But I just think that beyond that, like, just register as a Democrat so you don't have to deal with this. Like, this is, or, look, obviously, if you're switching ideologically or flipping or whatever, that's great. But I think this need of like self-expression through your ballot registration is just a total waste of time. So we will get more.
And,
we should. I mean, I can at least, speaking for myself, I'll get much more focused as best I can. And if you are, wherever you live, this information is pretty accessible online. I'd look it up because I agree with you. God forbid you're in a situation like that. Make sure you're registered.
Deadlines are fast approaching.
That's right.
California is early in the primary season.
Yep.
So get on it. I mean, people need to get on it.
You're absolutely
and tell
right,
your
Mark.
friends, because I feel like
Thanks,
most
Mark.
people who
All right,
listen to
I
this
appreciate
show
it.
are probably already up on it, but your Facebook friends might not be.
Yeah, and then when that kind of content also comes out, you can, that's the type of stuff that you can share. Hopefully, could actually be easy and helpful for people. Protests are still happening in Chile. Protests are happening globally. I mean, it really is one of the big untold stories of the moment, I would say, outside of some aspects of independent media. From Iran to Haiti, from France to Lebanon. If we properly understood what was happening in Sudan, it's part of the same dynamic. And there's actually been social mobilization in South Africa on similar lines for several years. I think in some ways I agree with the analyst Pepe Escobar that in Latin America, it's every place has its unique. And by the way, Hong Kong, some people don't like this. Hong Kong does have a labor dimension.
Absolutely.
It's complicated by other factors, but there absolutely is a labor dimension. And I will also note for folks that the non-mainland aligned factions dominated in elections. All that being said, I do think Pepe Escobar is right that in Latin America, in some ways, it is the most distilled and clarified, because this is clearly, whether we're talking about Colombia, whether we're talking about Chile, whether we're talking about Ecuador, or the positive scenes to some extent that we've seen in the election in Argentina, or AMLO's popularity in Mexico, that neoliberalism is really the clear target here. And of course, the brutal state repression, which you see in Ecuador, and you see very much in Chile, which has definitely developed a very different reputation post-Pinochet as being much more sort of developed and so on. Police have been violently cracking down on demonstrations in Chile since they've begun. There are protests where young people are marching with patches over their eyes to show the rubber bullets that have been intentionally shot in their eyes and blinding many of them. This is a reporter, I just came across this morning, Camila at Telesur. Now, again, I think Telesur is a very good source. It is a clear, it takes funding from the Venezuelan government. It has a editorial viewpoint, like every place has an editorial viewpoint. In the context of where we are politically and the complete dearth of any type of anti-hegemonic perspective in the Caribbean, Latin America, and across the hemisphere, it's an incredibly important source. And they have some extremely good reporters, including Brian Mayer, who's indispensable along with Brazil Wire for Brazil. This is a reporter on the ground in Chile from Telesur getting roughed up by Chilean police.
Tatiana, mira, estoy. Tatiana, mira, estamos transmitiendo. Mira cómo se nos acercan.
She's trying to do a report.
Mira, nos van a mojar, no nos permiten seguir con el despacho.
And they're circling her and hounding her.
¿Por qué no puedo seguir transmitiendo? Estamos presentes, por favor. En directo en el noticiero estaba hablando, señor. Avance, por favor. Bueno, no puedo. Mire, me están empujando, Tatiana. Es imposible trabajar así. Te voy a mostrar. Nos vamos a caer. Mira, por favor, hacia el otro, hacia atrás. Mira hacia atrás. Están empujando al camarógrafo. Lamento que este despacho sea de estas características, pero realmente es muy difícil.
Avanza por favor, así.
They're still blocking her shot.
No sé.
She's saying it's impossible to work this way.
Yeah, you can understand? Tell us tell anything you understand, please.
Avance por favor. Avance por favor.
No me quiere dar explicaciones.
He's not letting me explain.
¿Por qué me están sacando? Pero me están...
Avance, por favor, avance hacia allá.
Estoy al aire.
Sí, avance hacia allá.
¿Me puede dar una explicación? Porque no puedo terminar. ¿Sabe qué?
Avance,
No me empuje, por favor.
por favor.
Señor.
Avance, por favor.
Bueno, Tatiana. Bueno,
It's such an amazing dynamic because if the cameras weren't there, you know it'd be a lot.
Oh,
el estudio
yeah.
que hizo Carabineros de Chile es un estudio que
But they're
encontró
intimidating her
soda
viciously.
cáustica
Still, yeah.
dentro
Yeah.
del carro lanzaguas. Como podemos ver, es un estudio preliminar
Incredible poise
que
from
se
this
hizo
reporter.
con el Colegio Farmacéutico de Chile, por favor. Por favor, fue el Colegio Farmacéutico de Chile, el Colegio Médico, donde se hace el hallazgo. Probablemente, cuidado, probablemente no quieren que esta información se conozca. Nosotros estábamos en absoluta calma haciendo un despacho arriba, justamente para no entorpecer el lugar de Carabineros. El carabinero con el casco E20 está empujando a nuestro camarógrafo. A mí me están golpeando por atrás.
That's what's happening in Chile.
The caption says it all. The cops of Chile are suppressing the Telesur team in Santiago.
Right, because they're accurately covering the anti-austerity protests and the militarization, which has been never disappeared in Chile. It's just moved from the periphery back to the center as a result of these demonstrations. And also, you see in a lot of these democratic transitions that are really important, it would be totally foolish to, as an example, not fully acknowledge the power and the of the democratic transition that ridded Chile of Pinochet. But in these negotiated transitions, even as there was mass mobilization, and there needed to be negotiated transitions, that's the political reality, the core economic frameworks were not put into play. And as long as the core economic frameworks aren't put into play, you still have extractive system in terms of resources that are incredibly harmful to indigenous and First Nations communities. And you have the types of structural inequality that you actually see in Chile. So Chile, even for all of its relative wealth, has obscene levels of inequality. You know what other country has obscene levels of inequality, even though it has a huge amount of relative wealth? The United States. And that's why I'm so thrilled, frankly, that we have the leadership of someone like Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who just keeps going and going and going. You have lies about her. You have smears about her. And I just have to say, in general, folks, you're going to need to be a hell of a lot more skeptical about what you hear about anybody through any types of social media or rumor mills, particularly people in political leadership roles. This stuff is pernicious. It's been incredibly powerful, as an example, in Brazil. The UK. And you see it in the United States across the board. This is something that people need to get way more savvy about. And Ilhan Omar has been the main victim of everything from the kind of most crude, bargain basement, disgusting right-wing lies, but also more insidious and sophisticated operations as well. And what she really is like all of us, a imperfect person. And I never hold anybody to the standard of perfection because that's insane. But she is a courageous, dynamic leader holding the fort down on so many issues, even as she faces this onslaught without the support of most of the cowardly, pathetic leadership of her own party. Here she is, and what a testament to Bernie Sanders, the way she's campaigning with him. Here she is with Bernie Sanders talking about, in Nashua, New Hampshire, talking about what is really radical.
If you happen to believe that public education is a public good and that the right to education must be extended to college so that every student has a right to a fair shot in getting that American dream is a radical idea, then we should all be proud to call ourselves radical. If making sure that 45 million young people in our country should not be shackled with student debt and are able to participate in our economy, start a family, buy their own homes, and start that business that they are looking to start, yes, I am a radical.
Fantastic. And I'll say, I've contributed to Bernie Sanders. I have I contributed to Jank over the weekend, and then the only other people I've contributed to AOC, Rashida, and Ilan. And Ilan's the second person that I've ever contributed to. I think, and I've been critical of certain things. That's how politics is. But the broader reality of who she is and what she represents in Congress is indispensable, and hope for the times when there's a lack of hope.
Yeah. I cringed for a second when she connected radicalism with something as conservative as literally becoming a capitalist. But I understand that this was not directed towards me. It was directed towards all the normies out there that are a little bit scared by the word radical and maybe shouldn't be.
Exactly. You're calling from a Skype.
Hi, this is Liam from Norwich, England again.
Hey, Liam, how's it going?
It's not good, man.
Yeah,
it's really not good.
Sorry, brother.
I just called to talk about the elections a little bit.
Sure.
Just because I caught the Friday show and I thought I could shed some light.
Mm-hmm.
I think the best way to analogize Brexit to the US would be, like, imagine if the Rust Belt, all the Democrats who lived in the Rust Belt also wanted the wall, and they were just not going to change their minds on it, because that's basically how Brexit has been. There's just a significant portion of Labour who come from working class families and just don't want anything to do with the EU, and it does tend to be the older folk who were around before Britain joined the EU and go to them. And that's when they remember the good times. They think, well, the EU is what caused all the shit, as opposed to Thatcher, for example.
Do you think, though? I mean, here's my pushback, because I'm total. There's an analyst, Paul O'Connell, who basically, I'll just keep it simple. I think Labor should have maintained the same position it did in 2017, which is we're going to respect the will of the people. And we're going to negotiate the best deal possible, because I think it is very politically hard to pull off. One, the fact that the whole dynamic had been completely scrambled by Brexit. And that's another thing that's sort of difficult in terms of analogizing to the United States. There isn't this sort of big national referendum that sort of generated this 24/7 culture war politics in the United States in the same way. I mean, things like the wall, and also the wall is more simply a purely stupid and xenophobic idea. I mean, having objection, one can critique the EU from the left, right? Even though that obviously wasn't on offer. I agree. But so I think that, and I'm setting aside whether or not Brexit is a smart move. I think pretty obviously it's not a wise decision, but it was a democratically taken decision, right? And you got Labor taken basically for a ride by a bunch of disingenuous liberal forces who didn't back Labor anyways, who smeared Jeremy Corbyn, who fed the anti-Semitism lies, and then they got pushed into this incoherent, essentially Lib Dem position, and you were able to, the Tories were able to run on that. I think, by the way, also not just because of people's pro-Brexit positions in working class areas, which are real, and I think, frankly, look, they need to be respected. I can't elevate the opinion of a London liberal over somebody in a blue collar area.
Well,
but on the other, but real quick, just the final point is that they went that okay no this I lost my train of thought. That just saying that we're going to get this done and it's going to be over with is an enormously appealing message for something that had completely clogged politics for years. Laura Carlson recently told me, she's like, the left in Mexico, there's sympathy towards a new NAFTA just so it's done. It paralyzes politics. But anyways, go ahead, Liam. Yep.
I I was going to say, no, I agree with that analogy. I agree with you completely. And personally, just from my own experience, I didn't want Brexit to happen just because of my profession. And
Right.
I know a lot of my, because me and my friends we're zoologists. And none of them wanted Brexit to happen because it will extremely mess up our ability to do work.
Sure.
But most of the people I talked to, even in Labour, were all saying that we kind of do need to respect it. It's not something we wanted to do, but I'd say a strong majority of people would have been okay with Labour accepting the referendum. And I would say, and I definitely agree with the Lib Dem vote being a major issue. I mean, did you hear about Sam Gwyer from Kensington?
Mm-mm. Was that one of those very close
Kensington
margins that the Lib Dems? Oh, the Grenfell district.
Yeah, it's the Grenfell district. The Tories got 38.6% and Labour got 38%. And then this Lib Dem got 21%, who coincidentally is also a former Tory. And then someone like Dennis Skinner.
And the Observer backed them.
Yeah, exactly. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of centrists who have said since 2015, oh, Corbyn will never get elected. And now that we've constantly said that for the past 4 years, look how right we are. The smear campaign was completely destroying them. But
I think there was no ground you could give that social formation. There's a really good, interesting article by, I think, Simon Jenkins in The Guardian saying that the Lib Dem should disband. But anyway, Jamie, what were you going to say?
I was going to say that, Euroscepticism has long been a thing on the left. Corbyn used to be a Eurosceptic, and that used to be like a generally accepted line. And then it became apparent that all of the energy behind Brexit was coming from these right-wing, reactionary, xenophobic forces. And, most rational people on the left were like, all right, well, we can't support this, but we also don't love the European Union. And it's easy to see how that kind of let the air out of their tires. The left still doesn't have a real answer to the problems of globalization and neoliberalism. I think Labor was fomenting something of a start, like we need a real socialist internationalism that, maybe even goes beyond the Jeremy Corbyn program. But it remains to be seen whether this can be politically sold to the majority of the population.
I also think the other thing, Liam, yeah?
Well, I was going to say, I don't really see if there, just thinking from like an environmentalist perspective, I don't really see if there is going to be an answer to globalism, essentially. I think, unless you want to rephrase it as internationalism, that there is just has to be like the whole planet uniting against inequality and mainly climate change, because you can see it happening everywhere. I mean, just for us, for example, we've seen the changing on the birds which have come across the island. Some birds have disappeared. Some birds have coming over from more tropical islands. It's like, I really don't think there is going to be any option for the left to go any sort of nationalistic route.
I think
agree
that's,
with you.
Yeah, I don't fully, because at some point we also got to deal with like the reality. So I think I don't know, Mark Blythe's new book is going to be on what a response to climate change that actually was like, the truth is most power is still invested in national governments, and clearly electorates across the world identify with that on some level. So the question is going to have to be, how do you ameliorate it, and how do you build an alternative internationalism that's compatible with national and local, and a local and national that's compatible with international? That's like the real question. But I think
these national identities have totally broken down, though. Like, this is a problem. It's a sickness. Like, they need to think up a new kind of working class identity that is not nationalist, because it leads to fascism.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a lot more. I think, again, just like in a timeliness manner too, it's like a lot more complicated. Like, even that, we have to look at Like, Boris Johnson did not run like a quote unquote fascist campaign. He ran a populist and dishonest campaign. But in other ways, it was very tricky and very dishonest. And I'm saying this because, you know, I can sit here and just sort of, you know, like, there's what we want to say and what we want things to be like, and then there's what it is. And then there's like, how do we actually build a bridge between those two things? That's what we need to be actually trying to be strategic about. And I think we all have to sit back and read and really try to think about this. I also think what national means depends radically on your political context. And, you know, sovereignty is an extremely important thing, as an example, for the global South. But the last thing I was wondering, Liam, is do you think that like there is just a part of it that, and I feel bad saying this because I think Jeremy Corbyn is such obviously a decent person, and I think anybody in his position with advocating his politics would face the same onslaught. And again, that's why, again, people need to just be much more critical consumers in general. But what, like, just on a certain performance and presentational level, I just wonder if, you know, another leader might have been more effective at even just like parrying all of that nonsense on television and dealing with it. The kind of part of politics that's just like purely presentational. You know, I think that's something labor has to think about too.
I mean, I'm just trying to find a tweet to tweet at you, because it's a collage of all the Sun and Daily Mail front pages on Corbyn. Right. And I think maybe, and I hate to say this, but I honestly think if the person, they would have let up if the person A was a bit more centrist, a bit more Lib Dem,
right,
and B, basically, if they hadn't said anything on Israel-Palestine.
Well, I agree, but that's on the substance. I agree with you on the substance, but I do think that, again, I think even like, in a way, like presentationally, Bernie is, because like his gruffness, as an example, works to his advantage. So I think that
yeah, he gets mad and yells about things, and Corbyn doesn't, and people think he's a cuck.
I think that's going to be a national difference. I don't think British people in general would react to. I mean, most people over here do like Bernie, but I don't think Corbyn shouting.
Well, I'm not talking about him shouting, Liam, but I think you have to look at. I mean, we got to go in a minute, but I just think it's, even Ed Miliband, they just completely turned into a boob, like just a media caricature. And I think it's very interesting and tells a lot. And again, this is just like objective. I don't think this is healthy at all. But even like the negative things that they would say about a Tony Blair or a Boris Johnson are respected qualities in a weird way. Like, and you gotta deal. I mean, again, it's just like one of these things. We can say that shouldn't be the case and it's dysfunctional and all this, and I totally agree. But it is the case, and so you have to assess those qualities too. Like, I think that, I'm not talking about shouting, but I wish for 2 years, and I think this is I would have some questions for his team. I noticed a stark change in his social media when they started campaigning for the better. And I don't know why that wasn't happening for 2 years. I don't know why he wasn't in the streets. I don't know why he wasn't pushing back on every front. So I think these are things that we need to, critically analyze, because we actually need to win these things. I'm not interested in moral victories. Anyways, Liam,
I definitely agree with that. Just before you go, I definitely agree with that. And if just to say Labour candidates who would have dealt with that better, I would definitely say John McDonnell, and my own MP Clive Lewis, who's one of the ones who will probably be running for Labour leadership. Because I've been canvassing.
I have to tell you, Liam, I do think I hate to pivot. I hate to put them against each other because I like both of them so much. But there are clips of McDonnell where I would say, and exactly in that culturally specific way, he's not raising his voice. He's not. It's a different style, but he's hard. He's like a hard guy. I think that matters.
He's not going to run for Labour.
Well, I don't think it's not time for him to run, but I'm just saying I think that is like a useful contrast. Anyways, hang in there. All internationalism from us to you. Take care, man. That really sucks. They have 5 years of that shit.
He's on the front lines of it too, watching the birds die.
Jesus Christ. Bullprog. I pulled a Buttigieg supporter back to undecided this weekend canvassing in Iowa. He started off saying he likes Bernie, but he's too old. Biden might have the faculties. Yep. And Warren is divisive. So he wants someone someone young who can be there 8 years and proposes things that will pass Congress. I told him Bernie has massive support with the youth and is inspiring them to run for office because whether he's there for 8 years or 4 years or whatever, the main slogan is not me, us, and it's going to take a movement to pass anything with Republicans, with how Republicans have been playing the game. He went on to say how Obama was naive to think that Republicans would work in good faith, and I said that's why we're trying to come to the bargaining table with a dream bid and not compromise position. That clicked something in his head, and he said he's going to rethink some things. We've got the righteous arguments to win this. Even if you come across a Republican while volunteering, you can always say that you aren't there to debate, but to hear their concerns and tell them what Bernie can offer them. Bullfrog is out there doing God's work.
Shout out Bullfrog getting to Iowa from Minnesota.
Bullfrog is amazing. Bullfrog does all this incredible work for us. They're out there making it happen for Bernie in Iowa. And there's a lot to learn.
Yeah.
If you could, I don't know what your social media, I don't know, but it's probably, I'm sure, make that a tweet thread, Bullfrog. Could you make that a tweet thread? I follow you. I'll retweet it.
Yeah, because a lot of people are pretty low information and they can change their minds, and you'll get more bang for your buck there than you will arguing with like a committed Warren supporter or someone like that.
People on Twitter are dug in.
Yeah, yes. JT from Fresno, in the interview, you asked about the possibility of a driver-owned Uber. Check out Ride Austin, run as a nonprofit. My understanding is that Uber and Lyft are taking a loss by giving giant driver incentive prices below cost and under monopolistic practices. So Ride Austin's having a lot of problems right now. Thank you. That sounds interesting. I can't believe Sam hasn't watched Parks and Recs. When he talks about parks, he sounds exactly like Leslie Knope. I don't know what that means.
He really does.
I don't watch that show.
She's just a nerd for parks.
Sam should be cast in the reboot, though.
Yeah.
He should be. I mean, I guess if it's about some form of the public bureaucracy, it would.
Yeah, he'd be perfect for it.
For him.
Also, I'm sorry for having the exact same conversation with him about it twice, but sometimes it just feels like I'm living in Groundhog Day.
You had the same.
Yeah, I realized like as it was happening, I was like, "What the hell is going on?"
I don't remember you having that conversation.
All right, then never mind.
I think you're fine.
I think Sam would be a perfect sort of nemesis for Offerman's character.
I don't know.
He's a libertarian.
Oh, okay.
You know Nick Offerman.
I know that. I think I know the actor, but I am like Sam. I have literally never seen that show.
I mean, you might know him from the TPUSA uses his character in memes, even though he's a liberal in real life.
Yeah, I thought it was. That's what I thought it in real life. Isn't he?
He's a big liberal guy. I mean, he's like I like chop wood and barbecue pigs liberal, but
right.
Yeah, no. Sam is like Leslie Knope, like 10 years down the line after she gets totally black-pilled. From just dealing with the electorate 24/7.
Goddamn electorate. I hate them so.
It's just an episode of Sam telling Leslie Knope about the 2000 election.
And that was when. And
Supreme Court.
And the Supreme Court. And what I was doing was I was making a magnet on my fridge that told the story of the Florida recount.
All right. You're calling from a 406 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Michael, this is Michael from Arizona.
Hey, Michael from Arizona. How are you? What's on your mind, man?
Good. I'm glad to get on today's episode because I am a PhD student in applied mathematics, and I do research in machine learning.
Okay.
So what the guest was talking about earlier is a really important thing. And there's one thing I would critique, which is he kind of made the statement that machine learning essentially isn't, or it is biased, the machine learning algorithm. But I would argue because it is unbiased, you actually have an issue because the databases in which you learn from are biased, especially if you don't curate them or you have a negative source in which is curating that data.
I don't follow.
And
to be honest with
Are you separating the algorithm from the database that it mines?
And it is kind of important because the big reason machine learning works nowadays is just because of the vast amount of data that's out there. So essentially what Google does is it collects the world and then uses its algorithm to be able to assess, well, hey, this is in our training set, so we were able to reconstruct it. Mm-hmm. So if you have a biased data and then you apply the algorithm on it, then you're necessarily going to get biased results out.
So this is like the whole garbage in, garbage out thing, right? Basically, for
Correct.
algorithms, right? Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
So this is where it's really important that you the focus really needs to be on how data is collected. Is there even somebody curating the data? Because services like Google or Amazon, one of their biggest interests is in automating as much as they can to have as little human interaction as possible. So if you don't really have a good curator, you're going to have a lot of bias in it.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about human curation.
Yes, human curation.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think, what about following EU protocols on people just simply owning their own data as well?
I am totally for that humans have, that every person have their right to control their data.
Mm-hmm.
There is, I think your guest kind of talked about a point where it is kind of contentious, which is the fact that the reason these services really exist and why machine learning works really well is because you do need a lot of data to be able to do it. So you have to have some way in which you can actually collect the data in order to run these algorithms. Because machine learning is actually really stupid, for the record.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense.
That makes a lot of sense. It's a very simple algorithm. It's just optimization. And it's also a matter of what are you trying to optimize?
Right. Well, I appreciate the call. I actually think I understand this a little bit better now because of you. Thanks, man.
All right. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Have a good day.
You too. All right. Let's do a few more pieces of sound. Let's do the Giuliani stuff. We'll do number 3 first. I saw a line. I don't remember in what piece, and I wouldn't mention it anyways because it wasn't really the point of the piece. But this just unbelievable line that Rudy Giuliani is tarnishing his legacy. This is who Rudy Giuliani is. Rudy Giuliani is a racist. He's a thug. In my opinion, both of those things. I know he says he's a simple country lawyer.
It's like saying Vin Diesel ruined his legacy, but with all that racing of the cars in the latest Fast and Furious movie.
Absolutely. And I mean, this guy, his record in New York is a travesty in so many areas. And even beyond that, his post-mayoral career, after bombing out of the 2008 presidential race, has been doing private consultancy work that swims in the waters of all of this Ukraine stuff.
But he was the mayor of 9/11.
Right, he was the 9/11 mayor.
America's mayor.
America's mayor. Look at him rallying cops against Mayor Dinkins before he was mayor. Look at that. Look up that clip. This guy is one of the first national examples of that guy that the police force just tortured, he wasn't an angel. Rudy Giuliani is disgusting. And this is pretty funny. Here he is with Laura Ingraham, this ambassador to Ukraine that they are so upset about. And I want to keep making this really clear, disaggregating. I do not support NATO expansionist policies in Eastern Europe. I also don't support, frankly, a reconfiguration, a reversion to type of Russian hegemonic interests either. I think to the extent it is humanly possible, we have to support diplomatic processes and autonomy for everybody as best as possible. In a lot of cases, this isn't possible. And yes, I loathe the democratic worship of the national security state and the conflating of all of this stuff with hyping very dangerous policies in the region. That is very easy to separate from this 2-bit political hackery and almost certain crimes taking place here. Like you can, I don't even know, you can just walk at the same time. I barely even think it's walk and chew gum, just taking in a full assessment. This is Rudy Giuliani talking about that ambassador they got rid of. And of course, we knew this name was going to come up.
Our State Department.
Well, doesn't surprise me.
Let me finish without interrupting me so I get the whole thought out. Our State Department, under Yovanovitch, went to the police and told them not to do the investigation. And then they demanded they not do the investigation. You know why? Because our embassy was involved in wasting a great deal of that money by giving it to NGOs. And when I was asked, do the NGOs have a political bent? You know the answer I was given? They were Soros-like. They were left of left.
Well, I hope you have the president and the Congress and the Senate. We're out of time, but I hope Lindsey Graham and all these guys actually do an investigation.
I have no doubt that all of those guys will replicate the fucking nonsense you're talking on Fox News. That you can be confident in. And apropos of nothing, we'll get back to Trump and impeachment stuff in a minute, but we just did a Laura Ingraham segment, and it makes me want to go to story number 4. I don't know why. I have no idea why I would connect these things in the transition. Totally random, totally unprompted. This is a mind-boggling story. What the U.S. Department of Defense, this is the U.S. Defense Department, post on Facebook a image of a Nazi soldier to commemorate the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. This is Brian Finkel, U.S. Army PAO, posted this. I'm dumbfounded by a decision to prominently display, go back to it for a second, display a Nazi on a military social media on the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. Here, let's open it up.
It's a colorized picture of this Nazi, too.
And it's a colorized, so it actually is a touch-up for this guy from the 100th Mountain Division. Or, no, excuse me, that's...
No, yeah, this is
the Mount, right.
Several different military Facebook pages tweeted this picture out.
Right.
So the 10th Mountain Division did the
100th,
18th Airborne, U.S. Department of Defense.
Yep.
They finally got empathy for the people who were our enemies.
Yeah, and
it just happens to be Nazis.
So what is the explanation of this?
Well, Corey Pine's been doing a bit of digging here. He's very good on these topics. He has a tweet thread here that people might want to check out going through it. It's been removed so far. Nothing's been said about exactly why, what happened. But Corey seemed to have found a DeviantArt user here, Tobias Capo Kurtz, who sourced the image of a Nazi war criminal. There's an article here. I'm going to try to find it. Gizmodo wrote it up. Washington Post wrote it up too. There's a bunch of people that followed this guy's color. He found the colorized version on DeviantArt originally. So there's basically like what it looks like is they're in this Department of Defense social media team. There's a Nazi that loves Nazi DeviantArt stuff and posted it. I mean, this goes into say NBC News here. Let's see what they say.
Army Facebook post featuring Nazi war criminal sparks pushback. Yeah, I would imagine so.
Pushback on
that. I got a little bit of pushback on that.
It's like
a post appeared on the verified Facebook page of the Airborne Corps, which fought a month-long battle of Allied and German forces in 1944 and featured a prominent photo of Joachim Peiper, a Nazi SS Standartenführer, roughly equivalent to colonel. He led thousands of men, blah, blah, blah. So
convicted of war crimes.
So the best, and was convicted of war crimes. So the best that we can tell is that there was somebody inside this social media team that posted this inside the Army.
Gizmodo did it right up here too, Tom McKay. Defense Department Army posts glossy photo of Nazi war criminal to Facebook. And the thing is, and I posted this when the story about documenting what we all knew about Stephen Miller's ideological white supremacy. is that there's a pattern of crypto-fascist signaling going on in our government right now.
Right.
And the 14 words.
Yeah, the 14 words keep showing up in like ICE materials.
Yep.
Here's one.
Like it's a pattern.
Yeah, it's definite. Like, so here's Lori Voss wrote this out. This was in June 28th, 2018. This is an actual story on an official government website with a 14-word headline starting with "We must secure." This is not an accident. There are actual Nazis who call themselves Nazis at DHS. And I remember when this happened, and it made you feel a little bit crazy, right? Are you overlooking, seeing too many patterns? I'd also recommend this Lincoln's Bible thread that I have in this. There's a whole bunch. This happens a bunch.
Right.
The Health and Human Service Department recently told Senate staffers that case managers could not find 1,488 children after they made follow-up calls to check
so bad.
On their safety from April to June. That number represents about 13%. And then there's another time where they, let's see if I can find this right away. They keep trying to work in 1,488, so there'll be like 14 bullet points on a thing.
There are people
They're testing the waters.
who are conscious of this and seeding it in these institutions. That's very obvious.
Like, if people aren't terrified when the cops threaten to go rogue and do their own thing with the backing of people at the highest levels of government, I would hope people could be scared when the army is starting to go that way.
Look at the way they did this. Why would you relay a statistic this way? On average, out of 88 asylum cases that pass the credible fear of screening, fewer than 13 will ultimately grant of asylum, and there's 14 distinct sets of claims.
Yeah.
So yeah, these are Nazis. There are Nazis in the American government. We should have a purge of them, regardless of how bad McCarthyism went. We need to get these people out. We need to investigate all these people's connections to ideological white supremacy.
Not McCarthyism is an actual thing.
Exactly, right?
And that's the thing too, is also the problem, first of all, look, I am super wary and opposed to any process that empowers the national security state, that is ideological thought control. There can be right-wing people working in any function they want. If you have an actual Nazi ideology and you are implementing it in these institutions, that's not a question of a purge or McCarthyism. That's a question of basic democracy maintenance.
Yeah.
And that's not, and by the way, this is not a deep thing to figure out what these people are doing. This is inside their work time. This is not even like...
Talking about kidnapped kids.
We're talking about kidnapped children, and they're sending out writing on it that is a barely disguised version of Nazi talking points. This is synchronized. This is like, this would be more analogous to de-Bathification. Yeah. This is something that you need. It's a poison that needs to be rooted out and destroyed.
Yeah. Look, I want to overthrow our institutions from the left, but right now they're under attack from the right. And as such, it's probably good that they stand up to that and undergird themselves with, just some concrete actions against Nazis. That said, if there were like communists in some analogous department doing communist shit and like releasing secret messages like, oh, maybe today we're going to decommodify housing, maybe tomorrow we're going to make full communism, that would be good.
Yeah.
We have to judge these things based on their outcomes.
Right. They're not, communism is not just the exact opposite of fascism.
No, of course not. Of course not. But frankly, you wouldn't have to, it would just be a different process. You wouldn't have to be so cute for that aspect of socializing, frankly.
But this is the sort of thing that I hope we hear more from particularly members of the squad on. We need to investigate these departments.
Yes.
This is absolutely appalling.
There's another thing that would be really serious and urgent work for Congress to do, which is absolutely terrorize these institutions with all of their capacity to subpoena and push. Look, there's a letter in the Senate spearheaded by Senator Kamala Harris, that's been signed by Sanders and Warren and everybody running for president. Most Democrats, no Republicans, to fire Stephen Miller. It's barely registers as a blip. And that should be the tip of the spear of a million things they're doing to target these people and institutions. All right. Let's go to clip number 2. Wait, did we already touch on this in the beginning? All right, let's just do this. Okay. If you ever wanted to see what it was like to watch, what did we say? It was Donald Trump.
For the listeners at home, just imagine they're actually at like a coffee shop on a first Tinder date.
They're at a coffee shop, first Tinder date. Trump believes that gay men are great wingmen. That's why Mike Pence is in the middle of them. Just kidding. Here is Donald Trump talking to, I don't know this woman's name. Doesn't matter. What's her name? Okay, it's not even on the sheet. Watch Donald Trump drop a little game here.
Did it till you got it done and you won, and by turn we get to win because we're going to get to keep our family farms and we're going to get to keep South Dakota wonderful, and so I appreciate that.
It's a great place, and you also are going to have a very exciting 4th of July.
We are. We're going to have fireworks, and I'm hoping
for many years
you will
the
come at Mount Rushmore.
Oh, we're going to think about it. Mount Rushmore.
Yeah.
They ended the fireworks how many years ago? A long time.
Gosh, it was at least 10 years ago.
Nobody knows why, but you just couldn't have it, and now you're going to have fireworks. And
it's Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota. Just
okay.
Not to interrupt the flow here.
Governor
stop
of South
cock-blocking
Dakota.
me.
Stop cock-blocking me. Mike, you can sit here, but don't say anything. I like gay wingmen that say nothing, but of course we know you're not gay, Mike. It's fine.
But you just couldn't have it, and now you're going to have fireworks. And the governor called, and she said, "You got to do me a favor, right?" And we worked it out, and we got it done, and you're going to have fireworks. And I appreciate what you said on the thing. Those are incredible deals, and they're big. Yeah. And they're big, and every once in a while you hear a critic.
See that body language?
There's never been deals like this, man. But you have some globalists, they want us to lose money. Sometimes you have a globalist get on, I watch it. Who cares about the United States?
Protect us from the
Let's
Jews.
lose money. I'm the opposite. When I have deficits, I don't like deficits. You have some people that don't mind deficits. I don't like factories closing and plants closing in this country, going to another country, taking our jobs.
This is what I don't like.
So I've never really been one to...
Anyway, what are some of your interests?
Yeah, what are some things you don't like? Always listen to them.
Want to put up with it even. I've been watching it. It's probably one of the reasons I'm president. I've watched that for so many years where your factories and your plants all over.
Remind them of your
Indiana or any other state.
Not a lot of plants in South Dakota. I mean, manufacturing didn't quite make the Dakotas. I mean, there's a little bit of it, but
remind them of your accomplishments.
Whether it's Indiana or any other state, even you, Asa, right? Every once in a while they'd close one over there, but the fact is, I would watch as they close plants. Everybody gets fired. They move to Mexico or some other place, including China. And in China, they don't move. They just buy the product. And some people are happy, but no, not me. We keep our jobs and moving back. The agreement's very tough. The USMCA is very, very tough. It's very hard to move. Economically, it makes it really prohibitive to get out. That was very important to me.
Yeah, anyways, so you want to get out of this place?
Anyway, you like
Go
fireworks,
a little less
Kristi?
private.
Yeah, I'll show you some fireworks.
Do you get fireworks in South Dakota?
Yeah, you get fireworks there much.
Do the globalists let you do fireworks in Mount Rushmore?
Yeah, the globalists won't stop me from doing fireworks.
Meanwhile, she's like talking to him like a kindergarten teacher talks to the slowest kid in the class, and then listening like, oh yeah, cool.
Bravo-matic, FYI, the picture of Nazi Joachim Peiper was a Nazi commander of the Panzer SS group that massacred 84 American POWs at Malmedy. Wow. Yep. Tom from Minnesota, the toxic tension between haughty, cosmopolitan, privileged slice of elite liberals and the reactionary populism of the nationalist right will not be effectively resolved by a socialist international. The best hope is a populist left that does not exclude people's need for community for the sake of an ideal of a left vanguard. I think that's true.
We need an international community.
And that needs to be synchronized as best we can across all sectors, local, national, and international. That's the real task. And it's difficult.
Yeah, sure. We also need to move towards a world without borders. Sorry, like it's an inconvenient truth. It sucks. It's going to be really, really hard, but a dead end is not a shortcut.
We'll see. Hi, MR. Great coverage lately here and at TMBS, but the holiday season here during such dark times, hopefully people can think of others. It's hard to even type this, but I've started a GoFundMe to provide quality union-made shirts for kids who cannot afford the TMBS. Hoping to raise hundreds of bucks to buy 4 shirts. Thank you and God bless. Nice. Well done. Oakland Mike, we were hoping you could shout out Black Socialists of America. They're doing a December fundraiser and are currently behind their goal. People can read their mission statement at blacksocialist.us. It's one of the few organizations I know that actually has a building power outside of electoral states, and they've been endorsed by Chomsky. Thanks. Let's take a final call, and then we are going to get out of here. Let's see. A lot of folks on the line. Sorry for everybody who didn't get to. You're calling from an 870 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Mic check, 1, 2.
You're here. Mic check. Go ahead. There's
Okay, cool. This is Joshua from Arkansas.
Hey, Joshua. What's on your mind?
Okay, so I've been following the Democratic primary. Big Bernie supporter. I guess I'm in good company here.
Yep, definitely.
I'm kind of new to the show also.
Welcome aboard.
TYC,
so just what's your question? Because we're running a little tight on time.
So I'm looking at Andrew Yang pretty hard right now, and like towards the beginning, I thought he was pretty much on board with Bernie's Medicare for All plan because he was talking about single payer.
He's not.
So I just kind of assumed that was his position, and I reality checked last night. I actually dug into his policy. And he's saying, like, the spirit of it. And the number that stuck out to me is he says that 18% of our economy is tied up in the insurance industry. And if he thinks that if we just, like, because Bernie's like week 1, we're getting rid of it, right?
Well, no, not week 1. It's a phase-in process under Bernie's plan. But just to be really clear, Yang does not support single payer. And that's, I mean, he might say
that's what I've been corrected on.
He does not support a single payer. He supports some form of a public option. He's close. I mean, his plan is much more analogous to Biden or Buttigieg. It is not the Sanders plan. This is Ryan Grimm.
Give you $1,000 a month, which you can totally buy like a quarter of a healthcare plan.
This is Ryan Grimm. Yang's
my
out.
Area,
Let me just read.
$1,000 a month would pay for my family.
Yeah, I mean, it's not gonna. If you're concerned about healthcare, he's definitely not your candidate if you support single payer, which is the only way to ensure people healthcare. So, what is Ryan Grimm? Ryan Grimm's Yang's out with his healthcare plan, and it's this. Okay, I'm assuming you've already read this. Control the cost of life-saving prescription drugs through negotiating drug prices and international reference pricing, forced licensing, public manufacturing facilities, and importation. That all sounds
terrible.
Fine enough. Definitely, for sure, that sounds good. Invest in technologies to finally make health services function efficiently and reduce waste by utilizing modernized services like telehealth and assistance technology supported by measured and multi-state licensing laws. I don't know enough about that, but I would look at that extremely skeptically.
Sounds like Republicans that want to just give kids iPads instead of teachers.
Yeah, and also, what we're talking about. I mean, if you introduce new efficiencies into the health market without consumer protections, that can get very dangerous. But I need to look into that more and change the incentive structures by offering flexibility to providers. I mean, look, the bottom line is that he doesn't support single payer. And I think it's misleading language when you say you support the spirit of something but not the thing itself. So I would stick with Bernie. 100%.
I just wish I could get. I'm in this position where I like bits of Yang's policy platform with Bernie's. I kind of wish they would get together and maybe find some middle ground there. Because if you think single payer system on top of the freedom dividend, that's a hell of a package right there.
I mean, sure. I mean, how about a single payer on top of a federal jobs guarantee? That's going to do a lot more for people.
And a federal housing guarantee.
But what about the
also federal housing guarantee. And the other thing that's also really significant is if you look at his cooperative jobs plan, the payout for potentially tens of millions of people would exceed the universal UBI. So, I mean, look, UBI is fine, but it's supplemental. It's not core. It's not core. It's fine on top of those other much more structural things that could actually rebalance power in this country. You know, it's just more. It's looking at the actual long-term strategy of how you have labor power, how you actually have working and middle class that has some power. That's really the fundamental difference.
I mean, I agree on some level. UBI might be part of a leftist program to move us towards a shorter work week and eventually a post-work society. But right now, given the choices, I think the Bernie program is going to leave you with a lot more than an extra $1,000 in your pocket every month, potentially.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, honestly, if you sit down and count out the Bernie agenda in terms of what it actually will do for you, it will far exceed a couple of G's a month.
Or even if you just translate into the money that you're saving.
What? Real quick, what is it?
Back to the beginning, you don't think there's going to be a serious detriment if we just kind of remove 18% of the economy?
What? What do you mean?
Are you talking about expropriating the private healthcare industry?
Oh, yeah, that's a very silly talking point.
That talking point's bullshit, man.
Yeah, that's dumb. Yeah, don't worry about that. Not at all.
That was the number that was killing me right there. It was like week one, we're killing insurance, but it's 18% of the economy. Doesn't that lead to
a vast majority of people who are, well, no. I mean, doctors and hospitals and people who administer systems, they're all still going to be working, right? I mean, you might look, if you think the economy,
the back end workers, like the call center workers.
There's actually still going to be a role for people in those roles too. I have no question. But even beyond that, like when you actually get to a real number of people that might lose, there are supplemental plans for job retraining and redeployment in other parts of the economy. But
as long as we're speaking econo speak, I mean, getting people out of those jobs of private insurance is going to be long term really healthy for the efficiency of the economy.
It's going to be better for everybody.
No doubt. I wouldn't worry about that.
I mean, look, the CEO of United Healthcare will not be worth hundreds of millions of dollars denying people care anymore.
Anyone in this industry that you are sympathetic to is going to have a job waiting for them as part of a just transition program. As for the CEOs, they can, I don't care what they do. Like, they're not sympathetic figures. They don't deserve. I mean, they could get a new job, like doing public works projects or something. That would be fine.
They can start in the mailing room.
Put them to work.
Yeah, they can go to the mailroom. Michael Brooks looks sexy in tracksuits. Good job making it into work today. Also can't wait for TMBS postgame tonight, baby. Coolest man in NYC. Embarrassing Bloomberg ad thing happened to me last week. I'm a program and often get emails about work from recruiters. Got one from someone talking about a next generation democracy platform. Piqued my interest, so I took the call. I talked to the call right off the bat. He asked me what I thought about Mike Bloomberg, and he says the job is at the company building tech infrastructure for Bloomberg's 2020 campaign. He blatantly tells me support for Mike is required for the role, says there will be an exciting environment of enthusiastic supporters with lots of weekends and late nights. Not sure about the legality here, but I tell him I don't support Mike rather than I'm a Bernie supporter, so the conversation promptly ends. Felt really weird and kind of sad that they're trying to hire people for a neutral democracy program that requires workers to support Mike Bloomberg. Thought you'd get a kick out of it. God bless. Yeah, I actually do wonder about the legality of that. That actually does sound sort of weird.
Also, we need plants in all these organizations. So if you get offers like that, follow up on them and then just give us information.
Final IM of the day. RMY Eats Iowa caucuses are February 3rd. Get out there, folks. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar. Finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive.